Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wal aqibatu lil muttaqeen was salatu was salamu ala sayyidil anbiya'i wal mursalin nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khair everyone for attending this Zakat presentation and this Zakat workshop hosted by Masjid Abu Bakr. Inshallah, today's presentation will be the presentation that's been put together has been put together by Waltham Forest ulama. So there's a group of ulama that have come together, and they just carry out different tasks and activities which will enhance and support the Muslim community within Waltham Forest. So this presentation has been put together by various ulama using support from different ulama, and also by consulting different scholars nationally as well, inshallah ta'ala. So just as an introduction to today's workshop and today's Zakat presentation. Firstly, the Zakat presentation today is going to be based on and tailored around the Hanafi school of law. Now, within the different madhahib and different schools, there are going to be some differences of opinion. So we're going to be primarily focusing on the Hanafi school of law, and that's where this presentation, that's the angle that this presentation will be coming from. Secondly, this presentation is an overview of the main key principles that a person will need to know in regards to giving and taking of zakat. So, there are numerous cases that can come about. There are, thousands of different particular scenarios that can come about. But at the end of the day, everything is going to come back to a certain framework, is going to come back to certain principles. And this presentation will kind of cover most of those key principles, most of those key bits of information that a person needs to know in order to be able to work out which assets they need to take into consideration, which assets they need to pay zakat upon, how to calculate their zakat, and who they need to give their zakat to. So we'll be covering the key principles in that regard. So in a very simple case, a person can go home, look at the assets, or if they have a business, they can look at their business and they can work out which assets they need to pay zakat on, and then they can work out exactly how to calculate how much zakat they need to be give and where they need to give that zakat to. So those are the key principles that will be covered. There are numerous resources that have been used to put this presentation together. So we've consulted different sources and different scholars and different work. So you will find and you will come across people from you will see bits of information from different sources. So for example, Mufti Abdul Rahman Mangira, Zamzam Academy, Al-Qalab, Mufti Zubair, and so on. So we've incorporated all of that just to give a complete presentation. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَمَا آتَيْتُم مِّن زَكَاةٍ تُرِيدُونَ وَجْهَ اللَّهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُضْعِفُونَ. This is one of the key verses in relation to zakat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and whatever zakat you give, seeking Allah's pleasure, it is multiplied by Allah, and it is such people who multiply their wealth in real terms. Now, when it comes to the giving and taking of zakat, we have to think of this as, number one, a way of connecting ourselves with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a way of building on our relationship, a way of connecting and just becoming much closer with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Zakat is not to be considered as a tax, not to be considered as a fine, not to be considered as a penalty, but it's an act of worship. And when a person gives zakat, when a person distributes zakat, when a person pays zakat, what tends to happen is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then focuses on your wealth, and He multiplies and He gives barakah to your wealth. So a person's wealth can gain barakah by ensuring that we go through halal means and lawful means to acquire that wealth in the first place. But another way to ensure that we get barakah and we have blessing in our wealth is by making sure that we fulfill the responsibilities and duties that are attached with our wealth. So, for example, a father may have financial responsibility and duty towards his wife and towards his children and so on. There is also religious duties in terms of paying zakat and paying certain amounts into charity. That is also a religious duty and responsibility. So when a person pays their zakat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is informing us in this verse that behind the scenes, we may see a decrease in our bank balance, we may see a decrease in our statement, but in reality, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala behind the scenes is actually multiplying that wealth. And that wealth is actually growing for you. It will give you barakah in this world, which means that even if you have small amounts of wealth in this world, but it will be sufficient. It will make you feel content. You'll be happy with that and will be enough. And also in the next life, that the reward for giving that charity, the reward for giving zakat will multiply and will grow and will grow and will grow. And a person will be able to see all of that reward in the next life, inshallah ta'ala. Now, when it comes to zakat, I'm sure there are numerous questions that will come about in this presentation. So the way that we've put this presentation is there'll be different sections and segments. And at the end of each section, we'll then have a pause and we'll take questions in relation to that. So sometimes what happens is people have questions, all sorts of questions in relation to zakat. Let's try and focus our questions according to the section that we're looking at, and try and go in order. So as I go through a couple of slides, I'll have a break after about 4 or 5 slides, and then I'll say, if anyone has any questions, then you can utilize the chat section, and the questions will come direct to me, and then I will take the questions from there, and I will respond to them, inshallah ta'ala. So utilize the chat section for any questions. Try and keep your questions according to what's being covered. And if by the end of the presentation there's something that's still not being covered, then you're more than welcome to put those questions in, any other miscellaneous questions that need addressing, and we will have a look at them as well, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, when it comes to zakat, so what is zakat? So zakat literally means, the literal linguistic meaning is to purify. And we've mentioned that this is a spiritual purification of your wealth. So one way that you purify your wealth is by making sure that the source that it comes from is pure, you're earning through halal means. And then the other way is to make sure that you're purifying it in terms of fulfilling the zakat, paying the zakat, making sure that there's full barakah in that wealth. It is one of the pillars of Islam, so that shows the status. Just as important as salat is and fasting and hajj, zakat is ranked within those a'mal. So it's not just a financial penalty. It's not a financial penalty at all. It is actually a means of connecting, building that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when it comes to a more shari'i meaning, more technical meaning, in Sharia it refers to the annual duty of a Muslim who possesses the zakat threshold to pay 2.5% of certain types of wealth. So inshallah, through this presentation, we'll be unpacking and opening up all of these different concepts. What does it mean to have a nisab? How do we work out 2.5%, and what kind of wealth are we looking at? It has also been interpreted as a means to purify one's wealth by distributing a prescribed amount to the poor as a fundamental ibadah. So at the same time as it's an ibadah, it's also helping society, because it's making sure that the resources and the resources within the community are spread and are shared around. So those that have more wealth are then getting that wealth and passing on to those that aren't as fortunate. And then there's a fair distribution of wealth to ensure that everybody is taken care of. In the Quran, there are numerous references to zakat. So zakat, so there are certain ahkam and rulings which are mentioned, just by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There are certain ahkam and certain rulings that are mentioned in the Quran also. So the Quran not only does it mention zakat, but it mentions zakat numerous times throughout the Quran. And not only does it mention it numerous times, but it also brings it with salat many times. For example, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ وَارْكَعُوا مَعَ الرَّاكِعِينَ. That perform your salat and give your zakat and bow down along those who are bowing down. So perform salat and give zakat, always brought together. Also, وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتُ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ وَيُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَيُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ وَيُطِيعُونَ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ أُولَٰئِكَ سَيَرْحَمُهُمُ اللَّهُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَزِيزٌ حَكِيمٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is explaining who the believing men and believing women are. Who are the believers? So the believing men and women are those who support one another. They enjoin good and forbid evil. They perform their salat and they give their zakat. They perform their salat and they give their zakat. So again, you see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is bringing that in as an important quality of a believer. Someone who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to as a believer, as a believing person. In order to be classified as a believing person, you need to ensure that there are certain duties and responsibilities that you fulfill. And one of those is the giving of zakat, the giving of charity. Before we continue, I just want to make sure that the audio is clear for everybody. If someone can just type in the chat as to, if it's clear or is it cutting off. How is the audio? It's clear? Okay, so for Mona Huzaifa, it's someone saying that it's clear for them. Crisp. Mona Hashim is saying it's crisp. MashaAllah. Okay, good stuff. Okay, so the virtue of giving zakat. So the parable of those who spend their wealth in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that of a grain of corn. It grows 7 ears, and each ear has 100 grains. Allah increases manifold to whom He pleases. Now, just think of corn. So we're talking about like that corn that you have, corn on the cob. Now, in order to grow that in the first place, you don't have to throw in 100 seeds into the ground. You're going to plant and sow a couple of seeds. 1, 2, 3, you may plant a couple of seeds. One of those seeds will then sprout, and you'll start having the vegetation coming out and the plant coming out of it. And then that plant then manifests into multiple corns or multiple ears as you have. So you have like, a whole circle of corn, different ears within one plant. And then each ear itself has hundreds of pieces of corn, right? So we normally purchase one of those. And within one of those, you have hundreds of pieces of corn. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Prophet sallallahu are explaining that when a person gives charity, when a person gives zakat, it's like that person who's only planted one seed, but in return for it, they're getting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rewards in return for it. So that is the way in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking our wealth and is investing for us. Now, when we invest in this world, we may make profit, we may make a loss, we may even lose the capital that we've invested. There's a lot of risk associated with investments. But when we invest with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we put Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in charge of investing our wealth, then there is guaranteed to be successful in that investment. Because at the end of the day, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promising to grow that wealth. And it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who is the one that's in charge of making sure that there's a profitable return. So when we give our zakat, that zakat is it may go from our side. It may reduce in our bank balance. But behind the scenes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is growing it and growing it and growing it. And where for every seed that we see we've given away, on the day of Qiyamah, inshallah, we will see hundreds or thousands of reward just waiting in place of the zakat that we have given. In the last one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, take sadaqah, so informing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, out of their wealth, the believing people's wealth, through which you may cleanse and purify them. So then another indication that the idea and the concept of zakat is a spiritual purification of our wealth and of our assets. Okay, zakat is not a fine. I mentioned this before, that it's an act of worship. We should think of it as the reason why this is important. The reason why this is important to say is sometimes we may try to avoid giving as much zakat as we should be giving, or we maybe try to work around a loophole or find an alternative scenario where we can actually work out in giving less. So remember, if we may be deceiving the system by trying to give less, but at the end of the day, that's just impacting our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because this is an act of worship. So the more we can give, and the more generously we can give, and the more our heart is open to giving, the more that's going to build on our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's an act of worship and it's not a punishment. One should look forward to paying zakat, as it will be a means of purification, blessing, and great reward. Now, there are two things to take into consideration when it comes to zakat. One thing is that there are going to be some differences of opinion, even within the Hanafi school of law. So remember, we're focusing this presentation on the Hanafi school of law. Even within the Hanafi school of law, there may be some differences of opinion. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the more cautious approach if there is a difference of opinion. And the reason why we take the more cautious approach is because we want to ensure that when we pass away and leave this world, we don't have any debts outstanding to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have all of our debts fulfilled. We have all of our duties and obligations ticked off. We've fulfilled everything that we needed to fulfill before we leave this world and go and meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't want to have anything outstanding. We don't want to have any qada. We don't want to have anything outstanding. So if we take the more cautious approach, then we'll be giving more, which means that we will for sure, with certainty, have fulfilled our responsibility. Whereas if we take the more risky approach, then it's possible that our duty and responsibility is not 100% fulfilled, and there may be something outstanding and something we may be held accountable for. which of course on the day of judgment nobody wants to stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and have something that they are accountable for. We want to have everything settled within this world before we pass away, whether that's salat, whether that's zakat, whether that's hajj, fasting, whatever it may be. Another principle that we'll be working with is a very important principle that the Fuqaha mentioned, that we look for the method and the route which is the most beneficial for the poor person. So again, if there's a difference of opinion and for one method, the poor will benefit more, and for another method, the poor will not benefit as much, then we're going to go through that method and that route which will benefit the poor the most. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, alhamdulillah, thumma alhamdulillah, has blessed us with wealth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed us with certain luxuries and comforts. So it's our duty then to ensure that from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with, we then take from there and pass back to the poor to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, on the other side, so on the flip side, so you've got the positive, that you get the reward, the purification for giving, but then there are also warnings for not giving. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings this balance in the Quran, and the Prophet also brings this balance, that to encourage us, there's rewards mentioned, and also to ensure that we fulfill it and we don't lack and we don't become lazy. There are also indications of punishment as well, just to make sure that we fulfill our duties and responsibilities. So the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that whoever is made wealthy by Allah. Now this is very important, that you're made wealthy by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I did not become wealthy because I worked hard. I only have what I have because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed me to have what I have today. I only have the job that I have because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed me to be in that job. Otherwise, I wouldn't have, you know, I wouldn't have secured the job. I would have been made redundant. Something would have happened to make sure that I don't work if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't want me to. So whatever we do have, even though we have worked hard for it to some degree, but even our working is because of the ability that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us to work. So if, for example, a person is working as a mechanic, because of their intellectual ability and because of their skill and understanding of this trade that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed them with, they're able to work and gain money. So everything comes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why we have to always praise and thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whoever is made wealthy by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and does not pay zakat, so you've not fulfilled your duty and your responsibility on their wealth, and then on the day of resurrection, their wealth will be made like a bald-headed, poisonous male snake with 2 black spots over the eyes. The snake will encircle his neck and bite his cheeks and say, I am your wealth, I am your treasure. And then the Prophet ﷺ recited the verse, and let not those who greedily withhold what Allah has given them of his bounty ever think that it is better for them. It is worse for them. Their neck will be encircled by what they withheld on the day of resurrection, and to Allah belongs the heritage of the heavens and the earth, and Allah with what you do is fully acquainted. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the details, knows the financial situation of every person, knows every penny that came in and that went out. So we may be able to fool the tax man, we may be able to fool somebody else, we may be able to fool, people that are around us, but we can never fool Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us instructions to pay a certain amount in charity, and remember, it's a small percentage in comparison to what we've been given. We have been gifted with 100% of our wealth from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for free. We have not deserved it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through his infinite mercy, has given it to us and is only asking for a small percentage to be given in charity. So we should be giving that small percentage in charity. Otherwise, it would just be ungrateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, in relation from the hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam once turned to the companions and said, O Muhajirun, there are 5 things which you will be tested, and I seek refuge with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lest you live to see them. And from amongst them, one of them, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that they do not withhold the zakat of their wealth, but rain will be withheld from the sky. And were it not from the animals, no rain would fall on them. So the blessing, the barakah, the mercy would be taken away from us if we want to fulfill our responsibilities and duties. And the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, when you pay zakat, you have fulfilled what is required of you. So you have these duties, we have these duties and responsibilities. When we've paid our zakat, we've done what's required of us. There was a question that was sent recently that was, are we sinful for having wealth? Are we sinful for having gold? Are we sinful for having so much gold that we have to pay zakat on? You're not sinful for having wealth, provided that you're fulfilling the duties and responsibilities that are attached. Once you have fulfilled your duties and responsibilities, and that wealth is not, pulling you towards the dunya, and is not making you neglectful and negligent of your duties towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not taking you away from your ibadat. It's not taking you so far into this dunya that you've forgotten about your deen and your religion. Then there's nothing wrong with the wealth. But we have to make sure that we fulfill our responsibilities and we fulfill our duties. Okay, now getting into the A to Z of zakat in terms of the fiqh. So who zakat is compulsory upon? There are a few conditions that need to be met before zakat is compulsory upon a person. Number one, a person needs to be sane. Now, we can have more detailed discussion in the FAQs at the end regarding mental health, but as a general rule, if a person doesn't have the mental capacity to make decisions for themselves, a person doesn't have mental capacity because of certain illnesses that they may be going through, and as a result of it, they're not aware, they're not alert, they don't know what kind of wealth is coming in, what kind of wealth is going out, they don't really know, how much, they may actually even have a property on their name which is generating income, but they don't have a clue about any of that. Their children, their family members are taking care of everything for them. They just don't have the mental ability, mental capacity to understand what is happening. But when a person doesn't have that capacity, and in fact they're considered as majnoon, right? Then they don't have the liability. They don't have this duty to pay zakat, because zakat is a purely it's a pure worship. It's an act of ibadah. And if a person doesn't have the mental capacity, then they don't have to fulfill that responsibility. It's not a duty upon them. But generally, most people will have, the mental capacity to do so. If there are certain scenarios, sometimes this can get complicated because there are certain illnesses where you don't have. It's not like we live in a world where you're either sane or insane, and that's it. There's no in between category, right? You have a whole spectrum in between. You have people that go through certain illnesses, dementia, whatever it may be, and that in itself has a spectrum. So some are more alert than others. Some are able to remember better than others. So for the particular scenario in case, you may then need to bring that to the attention of, for example, a local imam, a local scholar, or a fatwa center, or wherever it may be, to ask for that specific scenario and for the specific details. And you'll have to then provide the details of this individual is, this is the exact state they're in. Do you feel that they have to give zakat or not? As a general rule, a person needs to be sane in order to have to give zakat. The second is a person needs to be an adult. So you need to be an adult in order for zakat to be necessary upon you. Now, what it means by being an adult is a person who's not reached the age of 18. We're talking about an adult from an Islamic perspective, meaning you are mature, meaning you are baligh. Whether that's through age, for example, the age of 15, or whether that's through signs of puberty. When a person becomes baligh, then zakat becomes necessary upon them. So this means the opposite of this is children don't have to pay zakat. So someone who is not mature, so for example, a 9-year-old child, 8-year-old child does not have to pay zakat. Children can have wealth. For example, people may give the child wealth. Some parents have investments for their children and it belongs to the child. The children can have lots of wealth, but they don't have to pay zakat until they become mature. When they become mature, that's when the rules of zakat will now start to play a role. Now, it's important here to understand first that we need to be clear about what wealth belongs to a child and what wealth belongs to a parent. There are a few scenarios that can come about here. For example, a father may want to put money aside for the child's education. So every month, the father is putting into a separate bank account money for the child's university tuition fees when they get older. Now, who does that money belong to? This depends on the father's intention, right? If the intention is, this is just my money, I'm keeping ownership of this wealth, I'm just, for the purpose of keeping things organized, I'm just making sure that I'm putting a bit of savings on the side, so when my child has to go to university, then I can use this money to spend on him. In such a case, the father is the owner of that wealth. The child isn't the owner. The father just put it on the side, just to, to keep check of their money and to make sure that when the child needs to go to university, they have enough money on the side to help them out. On the other hand, if a parent makes a bank account for the child and they've made the intention that anything that goes into here belongs to my child, right? And they're putting money in there regularly, or it doesn't have to be regularly. They're putting money into it, but the intention is this belongs to my child. Now that belongs to the child, which means that if you were to take money out of there for your own personal use, you would replace it at a later date because the money actually belongs to the child. Then in that case, because the money belongs to the child, there's no zakat on that wealth until the child themselves becomes mature. So it's very important to make this distinction, and intention is also very important. And a lot of times disputes occur as a result of not being clear in this regard. So especially when there's sometimes parents split up, so the husband and wife are split up, and now there's money in different pots and different bank accounts, and then the father's or somebody's trying to say that no, this money is actually for the child, and the other party is saying no, it was actually my money. It's not for the child, it's my own wealth. I just tried to separate it. That can then start to cause problems and start to cause dispute. That's why in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always meant إِذَا تَدَايَنْتُمْ بِدَيْنٍ إِلَى أَجَلٍ مُسَمًّى فَاكْتُبُوهُ. That when it comes to loans and when it comes to debts, to make sure that it's always written down. Make sure everything is always written down. So even in this regard, there should be an understanding as to who that wealth belongs to, and make sure that is always clear cut and understood. That way, even these kind of duties when it comes to zakat is also understood. Now, when it comes to things like child benefit, from our understanding, child benefit is not given in the ownership of the children. Rather, it's actually given to the ownership of the parent. Yes, the parent is going to spend on the child anyway, but that money is actually given to the parent and enters the ownership of the parent to help them support their child. So any money that comes in from there actually belongs to the parent, and that parent has to pay zakat on it according to their own wealth, unless they take it out and separate it and give it to the child and separate it and keep it independent as the child's wealth. Okay, so that's in relation to children and adults. So we're looking at not 18 years of age, we're looking at mature baligh from a religious perspective. Number three, a person has to be Muslim. So a person who reverts to Islam, or converts to Islam, they don't have to pay zakat on the previous years where they were not Muslim. Only when they've embraced Islam, that is the point at which they will now start to pay zakat on their wealth. And another thing is you have to meet the threshold of zakat. So there's a certain amount of wealth that you need to have. Now, before we go into the next section, let me just give you an overview of the next section. There are a few things that we need to have in place before we work out our zakat. Number one, we need to know what zakatable assets are. Now, we're going to have a look at in detail what zakatable assets are. But as a summary, just remember cash, gold, silver, and trade stock. Right? These are the four things that are going to be zakatable. These are called I'm going to refer to them as zakatable assets. So gold, silver, cash, and trade stock. Four things, zakatable assets. Number one, you have zakatable assets. Number two, you're going to have a threshold. So when the value of these zakatable assets which you own reach a certain threshold, then you have to pay zakat. If it doesn't reach the threshold, you don't have to pay zakat. This threshold is termed nisab. So you have zakatable assets and you have nisab. And once you have those two in place, then you will have to then pay zakat. So we're going to look at individually what the threshold is, how to work out the threshold, and also which assets are zakatable, and then how to calculate the zakat accordingly. So let me just take a little break here. Anybody have any questions in relation to what we've already covered? Feel free to just type them into the question. So anything to do with, this slide mainly, this is one of the first slides that we did in terms of actual fiqh. So if anyone has any questions here, feel free to type them in, inshallah. It's also just an excuse for me to have a break as well. Okay, nope, nothing coming through, that's fine. Okay, let's talk about the threshold that we need to meet. So zakatable assets, we're going to discuss them. And we're only looking at zakatable assets, right? So when your cash, gold, silver, and trade stock reaches a certain amount of wealth, a certain value, we're not looking at other assets, we're just looking at these assets. Okay, now the amount of wealth which makes one liable for zakat is called nisab. Now there are two types of nisab. There are actually going to be two thresholds, right? And depending which threshold you're going to use depends on which assets you have. So if you have certain assets, you'll use one threshold. If you have another combination of assets, you will use another threshold. So there are two thresholds. One is gold. Now, the gold nisab is 87.48 grams of gold. Okay, 87.48 grams of gold, which if you convert it today's price, I've had a look online, the price of 1 gram of gold is £40 23 pence. £40 23 pence. And the threshold is 87.48 grams of gold. So if you multiply them together, you get £3,519 and 32. It's meant to be 32 pence. This shouldn't say 92. It should say 32 pence. So let's just say, I'm just going to say £3,500. So the gold nisab is £3,500. So now if a person reaches that nisab and they have that much gold, then they need to pay zakat. And if they don't have that much, then they don't need to pay zakat. So that's one threshold. Okay, that's the zakat threshold. Then you have the silver threshold. So the silver one is 612.36 grams of silver, which today's price was 58 pence. I don't think the price is moving the weekend, so it might be the same as Friday. So 58 pence per gram of silver. So if you put that together, today's nisab according to silver is £355 and 17 pence. £355 and 17 pence. So that's your silver nisab, which, as you can see, is a lot lower than the gold nisab. So the gold nisab is quite high, the silver nisab is quite low. Now there are 4 assets that you're going to have which are zakatable: cash, gold, silver, trade stock. I'm going to keep repeating these just so that it sits in your mind. Cash, gold, silver, trade stock. If a person only has gold, a person only owns gold, they have no cash, they don't even have £10 of cash, right? They don't have any silver, they don't have any trade stock, right? Again, we're going to look at what is classed as trade stock and so on later on. So you don't have anything other than gold. From these 4 zakatable assets, you only have gold. In that scenario, you're going to take the gold nisab, which means if your gold is valued at £3,519 32 pence or more, you will pay zakat on that gold 2.5% of it, right? So you do 2.5% of whatever the value of the gold is. That's if you only own gold. If you own silver or cash or trade stock or a combination of any of them, so gold and cash, or you have gold and a bit of silver and some trade stock, or you have just some gold and some cash only, you have a combination, basically any other scenario beyond just having gold, then you're going to go by the silver nisab. So the jurists say you then take, because you've got a choice of 2 nisabs, you'll take that which is anfa' lil fuqara, as we mentioned before, that which is most beneficial for the poor person. So if you take the lower nisab, then you're going to more chances you're going to be giving zakat, which means there'll be more benefit to the poor person. Because if a person has £1,000 in cash, if they go by the gold nisab, they won't pay zakat. If they go by the silver, they will pay zakat, because the threshold for silver is 355, whereas gold is 3,500. So as a summary, if you only have gold, you will go by the gold nisab. So if your gold is valued at the price there or more, then you're going to pay 2.5% on it. If you have any other zakatable assets, cash, silver, trade goods, or a combination of gold and any of these, then in that case, you're going to stick with the silver nisab. So if the zakatable assets are £355 or more in value, then you are going to have to pay zakat on this at 2.5%. Okay, does anyone have any questions on this? Anyone have any questions on this? Is, silver, if only you have, some people only have, there are people that only own gold, right? There are people that only own gold and they have no cash. There are questions that have come in that, how do I even pay zakat on that, right? So obviously they can either, if they wanted to, they could sell some of that depending on how much they need to give in charity, or they can borrow some money from somebody else and pay the amount of zakat for now and, later, but we can discuss that in more detail, inshallah, later on. Okay, but just in terms of which nisab you use, is that clear, inshallah? Okay, good stuff. Now, the next thing that we need to work out, so we've worked out what we call Just see. I thought zakat was paying the difference between the amount you have and the nisab rate. No, it's not about a difference between the two. It's if you reach the nisab, you have to pay regardless on whatever the value is, even if it's, let's see, our nisab is 355 pounds, and just say you only own 400 pounds, right? So you own 400 pounds in your bank. You will pay 2.5% of 400. So not just 45 pounds. That's the difference. You pay 2.5% of the full 400. Okay? I hope that answers your question. Okay, the next thing we need to work now is a date. When am I going to give zakat? Right, so we've worked out the threshold. Now we need to work out the date. I'm going to call this the zakat anniversary. So when it comes to the date, remember your cash comes in and goes. You always you don't sit with a lot of money for life, right? It doesn't just stay with you for life. You'll spend, you'll get more money. You'll spend, you'll receive some money. You'll spend, you'll receive money. You'll sell silver, you'll get silver. You'll sell gold, you'll get gold. It just keeps coming and going, right? How do we determine when exactly we need to pay zakat? So you need to create a zakat date, which is the point at which you're going to pay zakat each year. Once you've created that date will stick. And only in one scenario will it change. But other than that, that will be your date for life. Okay. So the way to work out a zakat date, if a person hasn't already got one, is you're going to look at the first time you went above the nisab. So let's give ourselves a figure for nisab. We're going to say 350 pounds, right? Just to make it easy. 350 pounds is the nisab. So now the first time you go above the nisab, so you've got 350 pounds, or you got 351 pounds, you got 4,000 pounds, whatever it is, any amount above the nisab, you make a note of that day. So for argument's sake, the first of Ramadan is the first time a person, when they were mature, had over the nisab. So they had, someone gave them 400 pounds as a gift, right? For whatever reason. Now that is the first time they have ever gone above nisab. They make a note of that day. It's the first of Ramadan. Now what they're going to do is they're going to wait, not going to pay or worry about the assets or zakat throughout the entire year. They're going to wait till the following year. On that day, the next year, they're going to look at the wealth, zakatable assets only, and see if the zakatable assets are still above the threshold or not. So is the zakatable assets, the value of the zakatable assets still above 350 pounds? If yes, then the person will pay zakat. If no, the person will not pay zakat. Okay, so let me just enter some people that have come. Okay, so even if throughout the year there was an increase, there was a decrease, you went above and below the nisab. So the child, somebody, not child, that person gets 400 pounds for the first time in their life. They've gone above nisab on the first of Ramadan. By Eid, they spent 350 pounds, and now they only have 50 pounds left. Then by the time of the next Eid, they're given another 400 pounds, and now they've gone above the nisab. As you can see in this chart, they're going above and below nisab throughout the year. Okay, so they started off above, then they went below, and they went above. It doesn't matter. As long as on that day, at the start and at the end of the year, no matter what cash came in and out, you're going to look at the end of the year, if you have above the nisab threshold, whatever zakatable assets you have on that date, you will pay 2.5% of that. And that date, just for argument's sake, is the first of Ramadan, will always be your zakat date. So then now you're going to wait till the next first of Ramadan, and you'll see, are you above nisab or not? If yes, you'll pay zakat 2.5% of whatever assets you have. And the following year, you do the same thing. The following year, you do the same thing. The following year, you do the same thing. And you keep doing that, your date will never change. The only time your date will change is if your zakatable assets drop down to zero, totally zero, right? Or going to minus, right? If your zakatable assets go down to zero and you don't have a penny in your name of cash, gold, silver, or trade stock, you don't even have a penny worth, then what you're going to do is you're going to reset your calendar, and you're going to see when is now the first time you go past the nisab again. When is the first time you go past the nisab again, right? So now you're going to reset because you hit zero. If you don't hit zero, like in this case, the person never went down to zero. They were above, they went below, they went above, they went down. That doesn't matter. Your date will always stay the same. If it crashed down to zero, you will start again, and you will see when is the first time I went above Nisab, and then you'll mark that date. So for argument's sake, first of Ramadan, it was the first time they received Nisab. Okay, first time they got their Nisab. They met the threshold. Then by Eid, they spent everything. They didn't have a penny to their name. Then 2 weeks later, they got £400 again. Now that is the point at which they've, after zero, they've gone up to Nisab again. So now that is the date they're going to record. Just say Dhul Hijjah, 10th Dhul Hijjah, the second Eid, right? They got more money on the second Eid. So now that is the date that they're going to look at. And from there, they're going to measure, okay, the following year on that date, do I still have Nisab or not? Now, I want you guys to then have a look at this page here, this slide, and just tell me, I've only got 2 months just to make it easy. Ramadan, first of Ramadan, and the first of Safar. When does this person, this black line at the bottom is zero, everything else, the red line is Nisab, and everything above is 3,000, 6,000. Okay. So which month or which date is this person's Nisab? When is their Zakat anniversary? What is the date for their Zakat anniversary? Use the chat section to just write up your answer. When is this person going to look at the assets and say, okay, on this day, now I'm going to look at my assets and see whether I have to pay Zakat or not? Okay, Apple is saying Safar. Why Safar? Why is it Safar? Why not Ramadan? So let's have a look at this person's Nisab. So in the first of Ramadan, they got, what is this? They got £3,000. First of Ramadan, they got £3,000. And it looks like by Eid, they had spent it all and it went down to zero. So now, even though they went above the Nisab here, we're not going to take this date into consideration because they hit zero. It's going to reset. The calendar is going to reset. Now, after resetting, they're going to now have to have a look at when do they own Nisab again. So on the first of Safar, they owned Nisab, right? Now we're going to follow that throughout the year. It goes above Nisab, it goes below Nisab, but it didn't go to zero. It went above Nisab. And at the end, at the start of Safar and the following year in Safar, they were above Nisab, £6,000, right? So because at the beginning and at the end, they had the Nisab, they will now pay Zakat. And every year, this will be their Zakat date, Zakat anniversary. And it's at this day, they will look at their assets. Now, this is important because if one day before Safar, this person decided to sell their house worth £300,000, and they now have £300,000 in the bank, one day before their Zakat anniversary, the next day they're going to have to pay 2.5% of £300,000. Similarly, if even one day before you bought a house and you had a lot of cash in the bank, and then you bought a house and all of that cash disappeared, the next day is your Zakat date. You now don't have to pay Zakat because it's only on that date that you're going to look at how much your zakatable assets are worth. You don't look at any date. It doesn't matter what comes before, it doesn't matter what comes after. As long as that Zakat date, that's what you're going to be taking into consideration. Now, a few points to remember regarding how to work out that date, because of course it's ideal if you already knew this, and if you didn't know this from before, then there may be some backdating to do. So if a person, now we have bank statements, we usually tend to have some sort of record of working out. Even children have bank statements nowadays. Sometimes parents are opening bank accounts for their children at a very young age. So it's actually, sometimes nowadays it can be a bit more easier to know when and how you own how much wealth. So if you are able to look at bank statements and you have an idea and you can work out. So the first thing is to try and work out the first time that you reach the nisab, and then you work on that as your date. If for whatever reason you have a situation where you just cannot work out the first time, then you're going to have to make an estimate of some sort. Yep, you're going to have to make an estimate and then try and come up with the date. Remember, zakat, this date is not always in Ramadan. There's this understanding that you only pay zakat in Ramadan. The zakat anniversary is not in Ramadan. It depends on the process that we just showed. When is the first time you were in nisab? And from that point, a year later, are you still above the nisab or not? That could be at any time in the year. If you wanted to delay the payment to give it in Ramadan, you can do that, but the calculation has to be done according to your assets on that day of your zakat anniversary. So, and if, for example, your zakat anniversary is in, where are we now? We're in April, is in July, but because Ramadan is here, you want to just pay now. So you can just give zakat now, but then on your zakat anniversary, you can give it in advance, basically. And on your zakat anniversary, you then have to look at your assets at that time and see if you paid less, you're gonna have to make that up, right? So when you paid advance, if you paid less than what you should have according to the zakat anniversary, then you'll just make up for it, and you will just pay it at a later. You will just make up for it and give that in zakat as well. Remember, we're going to take the Islamic calendar into consideration because the Islamic year is 10 days or so shorter than the Gregorian calendar. So if you go by the Gregorian calendar, you're actually missing your date. You're actually going to be paying, you're going to be looking at your assets on the wrong date. So you need to look at the Islamic date. Some questions that come in. Yeah, so according to this question that came in, if a person, for example, embraces Islam and they've already got loads of wealth, which means the threshold, and they embrace Islam, the day that they embrace Islam is now going to be that first day they're going to put in. So let's say it is the 16th of Shawwal, as you mentioned, then that's your start date. So now every 16th of Shawwal, you're going to look. So the following 16th of Shawwal, if you have zakatable assets, you're going to pay zakat. If you don't, if you have zakatable assets which meet the threshold, you're going to pay zakat. If you don't have zakatable assets which meet the threshold, then you're not going to pay zakat. And that's going to be your date every year until a point, if a point comes in your life where you actually hit zero with zakatable assets, then your date will reset. Same with children who have wealth in their name and they actually own that wealth. The day that they become mature and baligh is going to be that day now, right? Because that's the day where they were mature and they met the threshold. So that's the day that they're going to take into consideration. So then 1 year from then is going to be when they're going to be looking at this. Yeah, this is a very good question. If you've paid zakat on something last year, you still have to pay zakat. As long as that asset is within your ownership, you pay zakat on it. So sometimes people think that I have a golden necklace, so I paid zakat on it last year. So do I have to pay zakat on it this year? Yes. So every year you're going to look at what assets you have, and you will pay zakat on it each year. So if you had savings in an account last year, savings £50,000 in your account last year, you paid zakat on your zakat anniversary. The next year, your zakat anniversary comes and you still have those savings and you meet all the other conditions, it's above the nisab and so on, it's zakatable assets or whatever, you still have to pay zakat again, even though you paid on it last year. It's every year you look at how many zakatable assets that you have and pay zakat accordingly. If you want to give more than 2.5%, you're more than welcome to, but of course 2.5% is going to be your zakat. After that is going to be optional charity, unless you're intending to give advance for the following year. So if you want to give more and just, you rounded it up or you added an extra 1,000 or something, and you're just giving that as an advance for next year, then you can also do that. There's no harm in that also. Okay. I think we can move on. So that is to do with the nisab. So we've covered threshold, nisab. We've covered zakat anniversary, which is your date. Now we're going to look at zakatable assets. Before we do so, anyone have any other questions? Just throw them in so we can deal with them before we go. Okay, so we said 4 things that you're going to pay zakat on: cash, gold, silver, and stock, trade stock. We'll leave trade stock for now because there's a bit more detail in relation to that, but let's look at cash, gold, and silver. So now on your zakat anniversary, let's give ourselves a date. Our zakat anniversary is the 1st of Dhul Hijjah. No, let's say the 1st of Muharram. Easier to say. So the 1st of Muharram is my zakat anniversary. So on my zakat anniversary, I'm going to look at all the cash that I have. So I'm going to look at my bank account, because that's the most of my money is probably going to be, or under my mattress. I'm going to pick that up and have a look at how much cash is over there. Or I might, I've been on a holiday, so I've come back and I still have some cash, but in different currencies. I need to add that in as well and take that into consideration. Open my wallet. There may be some cash in my wallet. And there are basically just work out where exactly all your cash is, right? So all of that, you need to then add it and pull it together. Sometimes if you go on a holiday to one country regularly, you like to keep the currency for that country just in hand already. You need to take that into consideration also. So whether it's in hand, in the bank, any currency, wherever it is, you have to pay the zakat on it. And you add it all together and you pull it together and you find out the total value, and then you do 2.5% and you work out the zakat. We're going to look at if you've given money away to people. So for example, I have given £1,000 to Hamid to borrow. Now my zakat anniversary comes and Hamid still has that money and he hasn't given it back to me. Do I need to pay zakat on that or not? The short answer is yes, but the detail will come in the following slides. Similarly, if somebody owes me money, right? Somebody owed me my wages. I haven't been paid for March, and it's April. 2 weeks have gone in. My zakat anniversary has passed, and that person still owed me money. Do I need to factor that in or not? This kind of outstanding cash and money we will discuss in the coming slides. So for now, just assume that everything that you have in hand and that you're able to work out, then you need to add that to your cash. Next, gold and silver. So we pay zakat on gold and silver, whichever form they are in. So even if it's in jewelry form, or whether you've got it as those coins or nuggets or whatever, blocks and bricks, whatever form it's in, jewelry, whatever form it's in, basically, you have to give zakat on the gold and silver. So you'll work out the price and the value of the gold and the price of the silver, and you'll do 2.5% of that. Now, in order for something to be considered gold, Islamically, it needs to be made up of more than 50% or more of gold. So you don't always have pure gold, right? You're going to have an item which is gold mixed with other metals, or whatever, for certain reasons, maybe to give it some strength, or to give it a certain shape or whatever, right? So if 50% or more of it is gold or is silver, then that becomes that's classified as gold or silver, and you pay zakat on it accordingly. If it's less than 50%, then it's classified as the other metal, the dominant metal, not gold and not silver. So then there won't be any zakat on it. Now you have the purity scale. So with gold, you have 12 to 24 carats. So 24 is pure, 12 is the halfway point. So anything that's 12 and above will be zakatable. If you have a gold item, which is, I don't know what the other ones are, 8 or 9 carat, right? Then you're not going to pay zakat on it, because the majority is actually other metal, so it's not classified as metal. That then explains to us that if something is just plated, gold plated, then in that case, it's not going to be zakatable, because the majority is actually going to be the other metal, and it's just been plated in gold. So the way you do this is you need to just work out the value of how much that would sell for today on your zakat date and on your zakat anniversary, and whether that's by doing it yourself and trying to work out the price of gold and weighing the item, or taking it to a jeweler and trying to have them give you a price of how much they would buy it for, how much it would sell for in the market. That is the price that you're going to take into consideration, 10 by 2.5%, and you give zakat according to that. Okay, stock we're going to look at in a bit, and there are other things that you pay zakat on, like livestock. For example, if you have a lot of sheep or camels, but usually that we don't have that, so that's not been included within this presentation. If anybody does have livestock, they can contact a local scholar or an imam, and they can inshallah work it out with them. Let me just take these questions that have come in. Yeah, we will do pensions later, inshallah. There is a section on pensions. Okay, now this section is talking about if somebody owes me money, right? If somebody needs to give me cash, or if somebody is going to give me any sort of money, do I need to take that into consideration or not? So there are three categories of that money that somebody owes you. There are three categories for it. Or let's make it two for now. Forget the middle one. Let's look at what I've called a strong loan and I've called a weak loan. Okay. So the zakatable assets are for cash, gold, silver, and trade goods. If somebody owes you money in cash in consideration for one of these four which you own, then you have to add that to your assets. Okay. For example, I give somebody £1,000. I own £1,000 and I give that as a loan to somebody else. Now I've given that as a loan to somebody else. They owe me £1,000, right? Now they owe me £1,000 in consideration for £1,000 which I gave them. So it's in consideration for a zakatable asset. So because it's in consideration for a zakatable asset, then I have to pay zakat on that amount as well. So if I've given somebody gold to borrow, if I've given somebody silver to borrow, or if I've sold gold or silver and they need to pay me, they're still outstanding. The money that's in consideration for cash, gold, or silver, I need to take that into consideration and add that as well. Also, if for example now trade stock is also zakatable, right? So if I have sold, I own a shoe shop, right? And I have sold 50 shoes to a person, and these are my trade stock that I have sold. I've sold it on credit, so they still owe me £1,000, right, for those shoes. Because that £1,000 is in consideration for zakatable asset, meaning trade stock, I also have to take that into consideration. Okay, so that has to also be added. So that's the important part to remember. Once you've understood this part, you can rule everything else out. So just to clarify and repeat one more time, if I have given cash, gold, silver, or I've sold trade stock, and as a result of any of these scenarios, somebody owes me money, then I have to add that into my zakatable assets, and I also have to pay zakat on that. Now, I give an example, £10,000 I've given to Hamid to borrow for 5 years. Now, year one, I still pay zakat. I have to take that into consideration, and I have to say, I have that £10,000, I still have to pay 2.5% on it. Year two, even though I don't have it, but I own it, and he owes me, I still have to pay 2.5% on it. Year three as well, year four as well, and year five as well. There is a discretion, however, that because you don't have the cash with you at this moment in time, you can wait until you're given the cash back, right? You can wait until the person has given you that £10,000 at the end of the 5 years. Then from that £10,000, you say, okay, year one, 2.5%, year two, 2.5%, year three, and then pay later, right? But it's liable on you from before, liable on you from the point that your zakat anniversary went by, but you can defer it until you actually receive the sum back. You may have given a large sum to somebody to borrow. You don't have the capacity to pay for the zakat for it right now. Then you can wait when you receive it, but you then have to backdate all the previous years. Okay. The second category now is what I'm going to call the weak loan, which is everything else. So it's not in consideration for cash, gold, silver, or trade stock, right? It's for something else. For example, I rent a house out to somebody, and on my zakat anniversaries, they still had to pay me £700 and they haven't paid me yet. Do I need to take that £700 into consideration? No, because that money that they owe me is in consideration for rent, for me giving them a place to rent, right? It's very different. If I provided a service to somebody, right? I serviced their car, and as a result of it, they need to pay me £200. My zakat anniversary comes before they pay me. I don't need to factor that into my zakat calculation because it's in consideration for a service I provided. It's not money I've given them, and it's not stock that I've sold to them. Okay. And this is where all these other categories of things come in. So, for example, outstanding wages, rental income. If a wife is due her mahr, her husband hasn't paid her mahr, he says, I'm going to pay you in 10 years' time, right? Until she receives it, she doesn't have to pay zakat on that mahr either. So the husband is going to pay because it's still his money at that time. Also, things like grants. If you made a grant application and that money is about to come in, it hasn't come in yet, it's been approved, it's yours, but it's not come in yet, then you don't have to pay zakat for that yet. You don't have to factor that into your zakat. What else is there? On applications, yeah, those kind of things that you haven't had to give anything in terms of zakatable asset, and it's not in consideration for that. So when you do receive it, let's say, for example, I was due rent of £1,000 and the person didn't pay me for multiple years and actually ended up paying me after 5 years. When I get the money back, because it's not category number 1, it's not the strong loan, I only pay zakat going forward. When my next zakat anniversary comes, I don't have to backdate all of those years in which they gave zakat to me. They didn't pay me. Okay, so I don't have to backdate. There's also another scenario here, and that is if, for example, I've given somebody money to borrow, right? I've given someone £10,000 and they have disappeared. I can't contact them. It seems like they've just conned me. I'm never going to get that money back. Or I've put it into a company and that company's gone bust. There's no chance that I'm going to get that money back. And I'm certain that I can't get that money back. That is called mal dimar. That's gone, right? So if somehow the person resurfaces after 5 years and says, here, I owe you £10,000, here you go, you don't have to backdate those years that he disappeared for, as long as you were certain that you weren't going to get the money back. So that's an exceptional scenario. And the fuqaha give examples like if a person is on a boat and they drop their money in the ocean, like you're not going to get that money back. You can start looking for it, but likely you're not going to find that money, right? Or you've buried it somewhere and you just don't know where you've buried it. So now again, these are things that because you can't find it, it's very unlikely that you're going to get that money back. So then you don't have to you don't have to take that into consideration. If you happen to get it back unexpectedly, then you pay zakat going forward. You don't have to backdate. Sometimes there may be an institution or an organization that has asked for, qard hasana, and you've given them the money, and then they've said, sorry, we can't pay you back. We're not going to be able to pay you back. We're not going to pay you back. And you've got no way of claiming that against them. And it doesn't seem like they're going to ever pay you back. And you don't have to consider that. You won't take that into consideration. If they happen to turn around after many years and give you back the money, then going forward, you pay zakat, but you don't have to backdate. Okay, so those are the two key categories. So is everyone clear with that? Anyone have any questions on this? So when I said you have to pay zakat on cash, there are some forms of cash which you may not have right now. Somebody owes you, you have to pay zakat on that. Sometimes you don't have to pay zakat on it. So you pay zakat on it when they owe you because you've given them cash, gold, silver, or you sold trade goods to them. Other than that, you don't have to pay zakat on it. Sometimes inheritance. Inheritance is one of those scenarios where you don't. So a father passes away and your zakat anniversary comes by and you're expecting that money to come to you, but it hasn't been distributed and given to you yet. It hasn't been separated and allocated your share. You don't know how much you're going to get yet. Then that is not zakatable at this moment in time. If anyone has any questions, then feel free to ask at this stage, because this is, I think, a very important one. It's money that you are owed. Pensions are coming up. Pensions and shares are coming. It depends on the type of pension. Okay, now I'm just going to throw in one more scenario. So those are the two that you just need to remember and bear in mind, right? There's one extra scenario, and the reason why I'm adding is that extra is because it's mukhtalaf, right? There's a bit of ikhtilaf in the difference of opinion. So if I said that if you sell a trade stock, right? If you sell trade stock and somebody owes you money, then that is zakatable. We know that. If you sell a personal item, which is not trade stock, it's just your own personal item, you sold that, and somebody owes you money for it, there are two opinions. Some scholars say that you have to pay zakat on it now, and or when you get the money, then you have to backdate. Other scholars say, no, you don't have to pay zakat on that sum. Only when you receive it, you pay zakat. So there's both opinions there. If you want to take the more cautious approach, you can add it to category number 1. If you don't want to take the more cautious approach, that is also a valid opinion. So there are two opinions there. So for example, I have my own car I don't buy and sell cars. If I buy and sell cars and I sell a car and someone owes me, then I will take that into consideration. But if it's my own personal car, I put it on Gumtree, I sold it, and they said I'll pay you next month, and I'm like, okay, my zakat anniversary comes before that, then there's two opinions whether I pay zakat, take that into consideration or not. And that, most people will, depending on the sum, if you want to be cautious, you can give it. You do not have to. That's just a middle scenario where it comes to your personal items. What if your agent, sorry, let me just see if, so if I give someone money and they're refusing to pay me back, yes, again, you have to determine if you feel convinced that they are not going to pay you back at all, they're just denying it, for example, and you don't have any proof, you can't even take them to court or anything for it, right? And you think that there's no hope and you're never going to get that money back, then you don't have to take that into consideration, right? But if you feel that they, it's still 50-50, they might not, you're just trying to convince them that, no, I did give you money or whatever, then you're not certain, then in that case, you will have to take into consideration. If your agent has your rental income and you have not received it, it depends. If you've fixed them as your agent to take hold of that sum on your behalf, then when they get hold of that sum, it's as though you have received it, right? So when you have an agent that's working for you and is your representative and is dealing and giving and taking cash on your behalf, when they do something, it's as though you've done it. So when they take hold of it, it's as though you've taken hold of it. Okay, so that will now have come into your ownership. That will be equivalent to coming to ownership. That's a very important principle when it comes to pension, which we're going to have a look at, inshallah. Okay, how are we doing for time? SubhanAllah, 3:15 already. Better hurry up. Okay, this is I don't know if I should just skip this one. Okay, let me, let me just explain a quick principle that, if I give you £1,000 to borrow for a certain amount of years, just say 5 years, and I don't want to pay zakat on that right now, I can wait till you give me money back. When you give me the money back, then I will backdate and pay zakat for year 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, right? So you can do that. Now, just remember that when you've given £1,000 to someone and you're not planning to pay zakat on it right now, all your other wealth, what you've done is you've paid zakat for it already. You've already paid zakat for the rest of your wealth. It's just this sum that has not been paid for 5 years. So now when you get the money back, the £1,000, the way you're going to calculate this is, if you want to, you can just give 2.5% for each year. So 2.5%, £25 for year 1, £25 for year 2, £25 for year 3, 4, and 5, right? If you want to. But to be technical, you don't have to pay 2.5% of the full sum each year. The reason why is because now you're backdating, you're calculating, you're going backwards. Year 1, out of that £1,000, 2.5% is paid as zakat, right? So you'll pay £25 in zakat, technically. So when you're doing year 2's calculation, how much money is left? It's not £1,000 because in year 1, you've already minus £25. So technically in year 2, you only have £975 left, so which you'll do 2.5% of that, right? So now you're left with £950 or whatever, right? So in year 3, so like that. Now this doesn't really make much of a difference if you've got a small sum of money and it's only a couple of years. In this case, I've done a case of 4 years and £1,000. If you pay 2.5% of the full sum each year, you'll have given £75. If you did this calculation, you'll give £73.14. This makes a big difference if you've given £100,000 as a loan to somebody for like 30 years, for example. Then the sum might, and you're not going to pay zakat on that now. You're only going to pay when they give it back to you, and you're going to backdate. Then it might play a much bigger role. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now we're going to look at trade goods and stock, and what you have to pay zakat on in terms of stock. So when does something, so cash, gold, silver, you pay zakat on all the time. Trade goods, when is something considered trade good, that you have to pay zakat on it? In order for an item to be considered as zakatable, intention must be made at the time of purchase that this item is going to be sold and not for personal use. So I bought a car, and my intention when buying that car at that time was only to sell that car. Now that car is a zakatable asset. So when my zakat anniversary comes, if I still have that car, I'm going to find the value of the car, £4,000, 2.5% of that, I'm going to have to add that as well. Okay. So you have to have the intention to sell the item when you're purchasing it, not later, when you're purchasing it, right? You have to have a firm conviction that it's only for selling, which means if I buy a car for my own use and I think, this car might go up in value, so let me buy it for my own use, and maybe if the value goes up, then I will sell it. It's not a zakatable asset, right? If you buy a car for your personal use, only personal, with no intention to sell it, and then later on you decide to sell it, and while it's on for sale, your zakat anniversary comes, you don't have to pay zakat, right? If an item was purchased to keep and to rent out, the item is not zakatable. The rental income is zakatable. So I bought a house for my own personal use or to rent out, then I will pay zakat on the rent that comes in when it comes in, whatever rent I have on my zakat anniversary, but I don't have to take the value of the house into consideration. If I buy a house with the intention of selling that house, I know I'm buying the house to sell the house, then if my zakat anniversary comes and the house is valued at 300,000, then I have to do 2.5% of that and I have to give that in zakat. Sometimes people buy land abroad and the intention is I'm going to buy it not for my own use, I'm going to buy it to sell in 10 years' time. You bought that for the purpose of selling and that's your only intention, then each year the value of the land you're going to have to pay 2.5% accordingly. So that is when something becomes a zakatable asset. That is when something becomes a zakatable asset, when you purchase it with the intention of selling it. Only then. If you buy it for yourself and decide to sell it later on, that doesn't become a zakatable asset. If you buy something for the purpose of selling, and then later on you decide that actually I'm going to keep this, it's actually quite good, then it's no longer a zakatable asset and it won't become a zakatable asset either. So I bought a laptop, it was going cheap, and I wanted to sell it. So I thought, I can find, there are people in America that will buy this for high price. So I buy the laptop for a very cheap price with the intention of selling. So it's zakatable. Then someone tells me, actually, you've got yourself a good bargain. Why don't you just keep that laptop? And I think, okay, that's a good idea. Let me keep the laptop. So then I keep it for my own personal use. It falls out of zakatable assets. It's now mine, right? If at a later date I decide to sell it, it won't become zakatable again. It's only when you buy something with the intention of selling it at the time of purchase, and that is your primary and sole intention, only then will it be zakatable. Okay, how do you work out the price of it? How do you do the value of it? So you look at the market value. So if I managed to buy it for something for £100 and it was just going very, very cheap, but reality is in the market, the value is actually much more than that, then I will value it according to the market value. For example, somebody yesterday, I know, purchased a PlayStation 4 for £50. Why? Because the other person had purchased a PlayStation 5. So they got a really good bargain, PlayStation 4 for £50. Now, I don't know the market value of a PlayStation 4, but I think it's around, I don't know, around £200, let's say. All right, 150, £200, I'm not sure. Just say the market value is around £200. So now, even though you purchased it for 50, but the value is £200, so you do 2.5% of 200. So not the price you purchased it for, the price that it will go in the market for. And you can get an estimate from different places of how much that kind of product would work out, maybe get different values and then do like an average and work it out according to that. Now, prices can also fluctuate based on retail and wholesale. So if I sell books, right, I may have 20% of my stock which I sell wholesale, wholesale. So I may sell them at £5 a book. And there are some books which I sell retail individually, £10 a book, right? So work out this much of your stock is sold at retail price, roughly, let's say 30% is sold at retail price, and the price of those books at retail is this much, then do 2.5% on that. 70% is for wholesale, so work out that price, which will be much less, and then you do 2.5% of that. So you can categorize your stock according to wholesale and retail, depending on how much it's going to, because the market value for wholesale is different to the market value for retail. If something becomes dead stock, it has absolutely no value anymore. You printed a book, it was really good, and it's selling, it's really hot in the market. And then all of a sudden, someone makes a PDF and nobody's buying that book anymore. Its price is zero. No one will even give you £1 for it. That's dead. The market value is zero, so then it's not zakatable because it's dead. Zakat is necessary on goods that are manufactured or in the form of raw materials, for example, ingredients, packaging, basically any item which is included in the final product and sold. So let's take an example of a takeaway. I own a takeaway. Anything which I purchase to sell is going to be zakatable. Okay, anything I purchase to sell is going to be zakatable. So chicken is going to be zakatable because I sell chicken to the customer, right? I sell chips to the customer. I sell sauces to the customer. Anything which I purchase for the purpose of selling and is going to be included in the final price that the customer is going to pay, that is going to be zakatable. Everything else is not going to be zakatable. So, for example, my shop, the building, I'm not selling the building, so the building is not zakatable. The thing, that silver, compartment or container that they have to store and to keep the food warm, I'm not selling that, so that's not zakatable. The frying, silver container that they fry in, that's not being sold to the customer, so that's not zakatable. Any product so that is going to be sold and passed on to the customer and factored into the sale price, that is going to be zakatable. Okay, so when it comes to a person that has a business, those are the kind of things that they're going to take into consideration, not something which is not being sold. So the property, the building. Yes, if a person buys and sells those those containers, those silver compartments that you keep food warm in, and that's what they're actually selling. They sell machinery, they sell equipment, then they're going to take that into consideration, part of that business. So I've got a little case study here anyway. Just if a restaurant has all of these here, they own all of these things, what are they going to paying zakat on? So what are they going to factor into their zakat? So you can just type this into the chat. So what are they going to take into consideration? Think about what is actually going to be sold to the customer. You've got the meats, the vegetables, the salt, flour, chairs, cutlery, chairs, tables, cutlery, sugar. You've got the actual building itself. You've got the cash. You might have a delivery car that they own. Do I pay zakat on the delivery card? Do I pay zakat on the cash machine itself? Food packaging, tablecloth, decorations, drinks, kitchen utensils, money that are owed to other people and loans to be paid. Right. So which one would you say is zakatable? And which just list the ones that you think are zakatable. Out of these, for a restaurant, which one of these would be zakatable for a restaurant? Okay, delivery car. Is delivery car, what do you guys think about a delivery car that is going to be taking the food to the customer? Just a quick yes or no in the chat. Do you think that would be zakatable? Nope. You're not really selling the delivery car, right? You're selling the products that the car is transporting. So what's zakatable? The meat is zakatable because you're selling the meat. That's what they're buying, right? If I'm selling, steaks, the customer is buying steaks off me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at how many steaks I have, and it might still be, within the packaging or whatever it is. So I'm going to have to value that steak and the steaks that I have, and see how much they would be sold in the manner that they are currently, and then sell it, and then do zakat of that. There you may have like a whole bag of salt. You're not going to have like little, shakers of salt. You might have a whole bag of salt in the back. Now, how much would it be for you to sell that bag right now? That's how much you would do. You pay zakat because that salt is going to be incorporated into the product which is going to be sold. Now, chairs and cutlery, you're not going to, because unless it's cutlery which is going to the customer. But if it's just, cutlery which they're going to be using and it's going to be washed again and just kept, that's not being sold to the customer. So you don't have to put that into your valuation. Building, nope. Cash, yes. Delivery car, no. Cash machine, no. Food packaging, those kind of things are going to the customer, so you would take them. That's factored into the price of the sale, so that would be taken into consideration. Okay, so that's just a general principle. Anything which is going to be sold, so you then take into consideration what is going to be sold, work out the value of it if it was to be sold in the current state, and then 2.5% of that accordingly. Some technical terms for zakatable business and zakatable assets in a business, non-zakatable. So cash. So if you have a business, the cash, obviously, which you have to pay zakat on that. Any cash receivables, so that's money that the companies needs to gain. So it's money you're going to get because of loans, for example, that you've given out. You're going to factor that because we said that money you've given to other people on a loan, you have to take that into consideration. Trade receivables, so you sold stock on credit and somebody owes you, you're going to take that into consideration because we said principle one was that if you sell stock and they owe you money, you pay zakat on that. And actual stock you have, you're going to have to value the stock that you have currently. If it's service receivables, so you provided a service for someone and they owe you money, no. Prepaid expenses where the money is already gone and you're not going to pay zakat on it because you don't own it anymore. Fixtures and fittings, no. Property, plant, equipment, no. Intangible assets, no. So you don't pay zakat on any of those things. So that's just a bit more to do with the actual business side and stock. Money owed to you. Now, this is, sorry, that title is wrong. That should not be money owed to you. That was before. This is now, you can actually deduct some money. Okay, so there are sometimes you are able to deduct some money, even though you have it, you can still make some deductions and not pay on the full amount. And that is if you have a debt. So if you have a debt on your shoulder, you can deduct the debt. Okay, so you already have money that you are owed. Now, it's important to remember that money which you already owe is deductible, not money which you owe in the future. So, for example, it's April now, right? April 4th. So all my bills have come in for March. So my water bill has come in, my electricity bills come in, my gas bill has come in, my Wi-Fi has come in, everything has come in, all my bills have come in, and I need to make those payments. Today, on the 4th of April, is my Zakat anniversary, corresponding to the Shari date, of course. Now, these bills are for the past. They're already outstanding, okay? They're already, I already need to make payments now within a set, 2 weeks time, for example. I can deduct that. So if I have £10,000 cash, which I need to pay zakat on, I can deduct all the bills which I need to pay already. And it might take me down to about, what did I say? If I started at 10,000, it might take me down to like 9,500, for example, right? So now I'll do 2.5% of only 9,500, not the full 10,000. I can deduct the bills and expenses that I already have. You cannot deduct future expenses. You cannot deduct future expenses. So the end of April bill, I can't deduct that. I know that at the end of April, I'm going to have to pay a certain amount. No, because that's not on me yet. That's not binding on me yet. There's no one asking me for that money yet. So that's why I can't deduct that at this moment in time. So future bills, you cannot deduct. Now, there's one little exception here. There are certain long-term debts which are to be paid in installments over multiple years, right? It could be over 15 years. It could be 25 years. Like, for example, a mortgage payment. Now, the principle and the rule with long-term debts like this is even though it's binding on you, you can't deduct the full sum. Okay. For example, if somebody takes a mortgage out of £300,000, right now they owe a bank £300,000. We're not talking about whether that's permissible in the first place or not. We're just talking about if a person had taken out a mortgage, now they are in debt of £300,000. Now they have £50,000, they may even have £100,000 in their bank. And can they now say, okay, I have £100,000, but I owe £300,000, therefore I don't have to pay zakat. In fact, not only do I not have to pay zakat, I can actually take zakat. You can't do that. The reason why you can't do that is because nobody is asking you for all of that money right here, right now, in this moment in time. A debt is something where people are actively chasing you up and say, we want you to make the payments now. So what the scholars have said, when you have these type of long-term arrangements, you can only deduct the payments which you will have to make within the year, right? So between this zakat anniversary and next zakat anniversary, within 1 year, what are the installments that I'm going to have to pay over these 12 months? Out of that £300,000, let's say within 1 year, I am going to be paying, I am only going to be paying £15,000 towards it. So I have 100,000 in my bank, 300,000 total debt, but I'm only have to, within 1 year, have to pay £15,000. I can deduct £15,000. I only deduct 15, the payments I'm going to make in 1 year. This is an exception for long-term debts because it's technically not considered a debt in the sense that you have to make that payment immediately right now. So it's not a haja, it's not a need that you have, which you need to deduct at this moment in time. So these are the 3 key principles when it comes to deducting. If you have something which you owe already in the past, yes, you can deduct that. You can't deduct anything in the future. And if you have a long-term debt spanning multiple years, you can deduct the amounts that you will pay within 1 year and not more than that. Okay. So non-deductible future, you know, interest. We don't pay zakat on interest, right? Interest is haram. Any money which has been gained through haram means, lawful means, doesn't actually belong to you. You need to go and give that back to the person you got it from, let alone pay zakat on that. So you can't pay zakat on interest. It doesn't become pure. You sell alcohol, you've been gambling, you know, you've got some haram income, you don't pay zakat on that. That needs to be disposed of, either given back to the person it was taken from originally, or it needs to be given in charity without any intention of reward. It's a way of disposing of that wealth. Okay, let's have a pause here. And anyone have any questions you can ask. So we've covered the, you know, the key aspects of what you need to pay zakat on in terms of cash, gold, silver, trade goods, nisab threshold, debts, what money that you can deduct, money that you're owed. If anyone has any questions on this, feel free to ask. A little 1 minute break. Okay, nope, that's fine. So let's carry on. Now, zakat and pension is what we're going to be looking at now, right? So zakat on shares. So if a person is buying shares in a company, then there are two processes that the person is buying shares for. Number one, they may be buying shares for short-term benefit, meaning I'm going to buy the share, the price is going to increase, and then I'm going to sell it on, right? Or the other option is I'm going to buy in long-term to gain benefit from the dividends, for example, right? A lot of people are now just buying and selling shares for the purpose of buy it now, price goes up, and I'll sell it within a short amount of time. So if you're buying a share, technically, when you purchase a share, you become like a share owner and you actually own parts of that company, right? But if you're buying a share, the scholars have said that if you're buying a share with the purpose of selling it, the entire share becomes like a zakatable asset because you're buying it with the intention of selling. Zakatable assets are when you buy with the intention of selling. So it becomes like a trade stock. So when you buy a share with the intention of selling and your zakatable asset, your zakat anniversary comes in between, then you're going to look at the full value of that share and you're going to pay zakat of 2.5% on the full value. So if, for example, all the shares that you've purchased for the purpose of selling on, their value equates to £10,000, you're going to do 2.5% of £10,000. If you purchased a share long term for the purpose of benefiting from the dividends, then you're not going to pay zakat on the full sum. Rather, what you're going to pay zakat on is proportionate to the zakatable assets of that company. Now, this can get a bit technical, so just bear with me. If, for example, a company assets here, remember, you only pay zakat on zakatable assets. You don't pay zakat on everything. So if I am a shareholder in a company, I bought like a couple of shares, based on how many shares I've bought in the company, I technically own, you know, that much share of each part of the company, right? Now, that company that I am a shareholder in, part of it is zakatable, the rest of it is not zakatable. So if, for example, the company is made up of 20% zakatable assets, so they only have 20% zakatable assets, and 80% are non-zakatable assets, right? 80% are non-zakatable assets. Now, out of my £1,000 value of my share is worth £1,000. Out of that £1,000, only 20% of that 1,000 is zakatable, because that corresponds to the zakatable assets within the company. Only 20% of the 1,000 is zakatable, which is £200, and 2.5% of that is £5. So if you have a share and your share is worth £1,000, and that company only has 20% for zakatable assets, you do 20% of your 1,000, which is £200, and then you're going to, so that £200 is basically the zakatable assets of your share, and then you're going to pay 2.5% of that £200, which is £5 zakat. So you, out of the £1,000 share, you're only going to pay £5 into zakat. Now, how do you work out what the proportion of zakatable assets are within the company and what are not. Then you're going to have to look at the balance sheet of the company, and you're going to need to have a bit of technical knowledge and understanding of how balance sheets work, and looking at which ones are zakatable assets, which are not zakatable assets, being able to deduct their liabilities, and so on. Some scholars, what they have said is that they've created a proxy. So if it's difficult to be able to actually go into the balance sheet and work it out, you can use a proxy of 40%. So instead of trying to work out the ratio of zakatable assets, you just assume that 40% is zakatable assets, and you give 2.5% of that, right? So 40% and 2.5% of the 40%, which is basically 1% of the total. So if your share value is £1,000, you're only going to give 1% of that in total. Other scholars, I think Mufti Faraz, he's done a bit of research on this, and he's looked at prominent shares that people invest in, and he's come to the conclusion that generally you will not have a company which has a lawful company which you can invest in, one that fulfills Sharia requirements. Remember, non-permissible companies may have more zakatable assets, like companies that are trading on interest and bonds and all of that kind of stuff, right? They're impermissible and they're going to have high zakatable assets. From the permissible companies, they from what he's seen is the zakatable assets don't generally go above 25%. So as a proxy, he's put down 25%. So just be a bit careful here. If you can, depends on the company that you're investing in. Again, some companies, if it's like a startup company, they may actually have more zakatable assets than non-zakatable assets. So depending on the company, it's according to the zakatable assets you're going to pay zakat on. If you can't work it out, and then you can utilize one of these proxies to give you an idea, an estimate of how much zakat needs to be paid. So just to summarize, if you're buying a share with the intention of selling it, you pay 2.5% of the full value. If you're buying it for long-term benefit, then you're going to pay 2.5% of proportionate to the zakatable assets of that company. And if you can't work it out, then you can use a proxy. Okay, now let's move on to pensions. There are two types of pensions. Sorry, I'm just think about the time is going quite fast. There are two types of pensions. There are zakatable and non-zakatable pensions. So just to take a step back, if the pension is something, let's just say state pensions are not zakatable. So anything that goes into national insurance contributions, for example, they're not zakatable, right? Defined benefit schemes are also not zakatable. So if you have a pension scheme and it's termed as a defined benefit scheme, then it's not zakatable, right? If you have a defined contribution scheme or a money purchase scheme, then that is going to be zakatable, right? Now, the reason why there's a difference here, there's a bit of technical difference, and that is when your employer takes a part of your wage and has not given it to you yet, your wage has not been given to you as of yet, they take that wage of yours and they give it to a pension provider, right? They pass it on to the pension provider. Now we have to look at who the pension provider is working for. In a defined contribution scheme, the pension provider actually works on behalf of the employee, right? Or me, works on my behalf. So because they're my representative, even though that money has not come to me, it's gone to my wakil, my agent, my representative. So when they take possession of that money, it's as though I've taken possession of the money. Hence, even though that cash hasn't come to me, I've still taken possession of it. If I've taken possession of it, that means I own that. I own that sum of money. Hence, when that money is then invested, it's as though that is my investment. Okay, that's why a defined contribution scheme works like this, and you have to pay zakat on it. And we know that that pension company is actually working for you, because if the investments were to make a loss, you would make a loss. If the investments were to be profitable, then you will make profit accordingly. So that pension company is actually working for you, and the profit and loss is actually passed on to you. So that is your accountability. So on a defined contribution money purchase, you would have to pay zakat on it. With a defined benefit scheme, the reason why you don't pay zakat on a defined benefit scheme, whether it's a final salary scheme or career average scheme, is because in that case, what happens is the company is actually, the pension provider is actually working for the employer, So the money, your wage has gone to the pension company, that hasn't come into your ownership yet. because it's the pension company that has taken possession on behalf of the employer. Then they invest. If that's profitable, the company will make profit. If that makes a loss, the company makes a loss. It's got nothing to do with you. You are guaranteed a defined benefit at the end when you retire. So with a defined benefit scheme, you don't have to pay zakat as you're going along because it's not your cash, it's not your investment. Only when they start making payments to you, as and when you receive those payments, you will pay zakat according to what you have received. With a defined contribution scheme, on the other hand, you have to pay zakat as you go along. Now, how do you do this? This page is a bit more technical. What I've done, it's the same thing. That investment is like you buying shares in a company, right? Because what the pension company is going to do is that pension company is going to take your money, so it's your investment, and they're going to buy shares in companies, or they're going to make investments. Any investments which they make is going to be considered your investments, right? Now, if they purchase shares within a particular company, then how much zakat you have to pay is going to be according to the ratio of zakatable assets within that company which they've invested in, and there may be multiple companies they've invested in, and that can get very technical and get very detailed to try and actually work out exactly how much you have to pay zakat on. So again, Mufti Faraz, what he has done is he's had a look at a certain number of pension funds and where they invest, and he's determined proxies to make it easy for people to determine how much zakat needs to be given. What we need to do is just identify what is the asset class of our pension. So if you have a defined contribution, if you have a defined benefit, forget about it, no zakat. If you have defined contribution, you just need to work out the asset class. Okay. So for example, I just picked up, this was last year, sorry, I picked up a company, Scottish Equitable PLC, right? Now, when you look up the information for that company, you will actually see, and your pension fund, the pension fund, you will actually find asset class. So the asset class here is mixed assets. So just say you're with this pension fund, it's mixed assets. Now, you can have a look at this proxy table here. If your asset class is Sharia fund, then the zakatable assets within that company are 26%, right? If it's in property, then it's 15%. If it's equity, it's 27%. If it's mixed asset, it's 50%. If it's bond, bills, fixed interest funds, it's 100% of the capital. That's impermissible to invest in the first place, and you shouldn't have a pension there in the first place. But had you put an investment in there, then your capital will actually be 100% zakatable. Now, the way to work this out, let's say, for example, your pension pot is worth £100,000. When you look at your fund information, you see the asset class is mixed assets. So you look at the proxy, 26%. So if your pension fund is valued at £100,000 and 26% of that is zakatable assets, right? So out of the 100,000, 26% is zakatable. So from the 26%, you do 2.5% of that, and that will tell you how much zakat you need to pay. So you need to pay that on a yearly basis. If you don't have the sum to be able to make that payment, then you will wait until you receive payments. So make as many payments as you can, and then you will wait till you receive those payments to you. Then you can start backdating and make the payments back accordingly. Okay. So, for example, sometimes your pension may be made up of half equity fund and half property fund, for example. So in this case, I've got a scenario where a person's pension 50% is equity fund, 50% is property. So the 50%, which is in equity fund, only 27% of that 50% is zakatable, right? So the total of that is 13.5% because 27% of the 50. The other half of the pension fund is invested in property, which is 15% of that is zakatable, so which is technically 7.5% of the full 100%. So if you add them together, you get the 21% is zakatable. So if your pension value is now £10,000, you're only going to do 21% of £10,000. Okay, 21% of £10,000, and then you're going to do 2.5% of that. So it always works out to be a much smaller number. If your pension value is 10,000, you're only paying zakat of £52.50. You're going to work out what is the zakatable assets ratio, and then you're going to work out 2.5% of that. Hope that was clear. Just as like a little animation, if, for example, this is your pension fund, get a color that's a bit more clearer, right? 50% is equity, 50% is property. So of that 50%, only 27% is actually zakatable, right? 27% of zakatable. And of the other 50%, only 15% is zakatable. Only 15% is zakatable. Out of the full fund, only 21% is zakatable. Out of the full fund, only 21% of the full fund is zakatable. So you're going to do 2.5% of that. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so that is everything that you need to pay zakat on: cash, gold, silver, trade goods. Work out your shares and pension according to how we mentioned. Work out money that you are owed by people based on the strong debt. Deduct anything that is immediate, but in the case of long-term debts, then for 1 year, apply 2.5% of that, and that is what you're going to pay zakat on. Okay, we've only got about 10 minutes. So I'm going to quickly go through the masarif. This is where you're going to be giving zakat to. So any principles in relation to who you need to give zakat to. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ وَفِي الرِّقَابِ وَالْغَارِمِينَ وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَابْنِ السَّبِيلِ فَرِيضَةً مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ عَلِيمٌ حَكِيمٌ. So there are actually 8 categories mentioned in the Quran, though we don't give zakat to all 8 categories. So the first category is the fuqara, that is a person who has wealth but below the nisab. Number 2, the miskin is a person who's poor and has absolutely no wealth at all. The amilin are administrators employed by an Islamic government to collect and distribute zakat. So the Islamic government, when they're working with these amilin to collect and distribute zakat, they can take a percentage and give it to their workers because the government has wilaya and authority over the people and are representing the people. They can then take from that zakat and use that to make payments. But that is in the case of an Islamic government has the right to do that. Mu'allafatul qulub, this is a category of people that used to be given money previously, but many jurists consider this to be either abrogated or to not to take place currently. These are people who, for example, when Islam was Muslims were minority as opposed to the majority of non-Muslims, and Islam was a lot weaker in terms of looking at the world generally and the different states that were in existence. So in order to help the Muslim community grow and to kind of secure relationships with other non-Muslims as well, zakat could be given to certain people for the purpose of building that strength and building that community. So that is something which is not a category or it's not an application at this moment in time. Fir riqab is also a category which is not applicable today. So when people had slaves, they would sometimes, a master may make an agreement with his slave that if you give me £10,000, I'll free you. So you could actually help pay that slave off and you can give them zakat to help pay you off. Ghanimin is a person that has so much debt that they fall under the threshold and they can now take zakat. You can help them pay their debt off. Fi sabilillah is a person who's traveling, is away from home. Even though they may have lots of money at home, they don't have cash with them at this moment in time. So for example, there was a case where some students had come from Pakistan to study in Manchester in a college, and when they got to England, they actually realized that the whole thing was a fraud. Very interesting. I don't know how that happened, right? But the whole thing was a fraud. There was actually no college, and they've arrived in England. They've been told that they're going to be set up with accommodation somewhere. There was actually no accommodation. There was nothing. And now they were stuck in the country with absolutely no money. Lots of money at home, no money here. And there's no way of accessing that wealth. So they can also be given zakat. Fi sabilillah is in the cause of Allah, so poor soldiers in the Muslim armed forces to help them and support them. Some have also included this for a person who's gone for Hajj and the wealth has depleted on the journey. They have nothing to continue with their Hajj. And last one, no, sorry, Ibn Sabil is the traveler. Sorry, I've done the traveler, person who travels. So when generally looking at a poor person, we're looking at a poor person, and that is who we're going to be giving zakat to. The slides and recording can be shared, inshallah. It is being recorded. I will arrange that, inshallah, with Mawlana Hudayfa. Okay, zakatable. Generally, a person has 2 types of wealth, zakatable and non-zakatable. This is important to understand who we can give zakat to. So zakatable wealth are what we've already discussed: gold, silver, and trade goods. Non-zakatable wealth is everything else. So for example, my house, my home, my personal assets, my car, my phone, all of these things are non-zakatable assets. Now from the non-zakatable assets, you have 2 categories: those things which are necessary for you to keep going, to keep living, and those things that are beyond your necessity. Now, when it comes to giving zakat, let me just skip this slide for now and just jump here. This will be an easy way to understand it. There are two types of assets. You have the blue are zakatable and green is non-zakatable assets. Now, if a person has zakatable assets above nisab, the person has blue zakatable assets above nisab, like we said, they're going to pay zakat, and they can't receive zakat. Obviously, they have to pay zakat, right? If a person has zakatable assets of below, so for example, they've got about 200 pounds of cash, but then they've got loads of non-zakatable assets that go above the nisab, There's a value of all the other assets go above the nisab. Now remember, we're excluding stuff that they need. So for example, I have a house. I need to live in my house. So I'm not going to count that in my non-zakatable assets. I need my car. So I'm not going to count that in my non-zakatable assets. I need my clothing, right? So I'm not going to count the value of that in my zakatable assets. There are certain, the kitchen, the washing machine, the fridge, all of these things are my essentials. So when we talk about non-zakatable assets, we're not talking about those things that are considered essentials. We're talking about things that are beyond and not really essential to you. For example, you've got a laptop which you have for work and stuff, but then you have something extra just at home and you don't really need it. Or you have two extra laptops for no reason. One laptop is just sitting there. Now that is extra. You're not really using it. It's not really providing you any utility. So in that case, that is considered a non-zakatable asset, be your asset beyond your need. So now let's have a look at this chart. If a person has zakatable assets are below, so they have 200 pounds in cash. That's all they have from zakatable assets. Because they're below the nisab, they're not going to pay zakat. But if the non-zakatable assets, excluding their needs, the rest of the non-zakatable assets which are beyond their needs above nisab, then they cannot be a recipient of zakat. You cannot give zakat to them. Okay, so that's an important category to remember. So you can't just give zakat to everyone who you think is poor. You need to know that are they actually a valid recipient or not. And number three, you have a person whose zakatable assets are below and the non-zakatable assets are below the nisab. That is the person who we're going to look for and we're going to give them zakat. Now, in terms of the necessary assets, what can you deduct as a necessary asset? So the clothing which a person is using, household goods and utensils, assets you're using for work. So a person is working as a plumber and they have a van full of all their tools, very expensive tools worth about 10,000 pounds, right? They're not going to include that in the assets because they're definitely not zakatable assets because they're not selling them, but they're not going to consider as their non-zakatable assets because they need it for work. It's part of what they need, right? It's part of the tools that they need for their trade. So it's not extra, it's actually needed. Your place of residence. So those kind of things you can deduct. If, for example, a person has like a 500-pound wedding dress, which they used once when they got married and they're never ever planning to use that again, and it's not something that can be used in other weddings, and it's just there for the purpose of, it feels good, it's a good reminder, then that is not, you can't deduct that. You have to take that price into consideration because it's not an essential for you anymore. It's just there extra. So we're targeting those people who don't have zakatable assets above nisab, and the non-zakatable assets minus the essentials also falls below the nisab value. In that case, that person, you can give zakat to them. Now, it's very important that ownership, you make that person the owner of that wealth. You can't give something to borrow. For example, I can't have a open dawat and an open invitation and say, everybody come and eat at my house today. That doesn't count because I'm not making anybody the owner of that money. I need to make that person owner of a particular amount of money, right? That's very important. Ownership is key. And you can't have any benefit attached to that. It has to be solely their own personal cash. So for example, if I was to dig a well in a poor city and that is open for everybody to use, I didn't make anyone the owner of that. I can't use zakat money to pay for that, right? But if I find a poor person and I say, let me dig a well for you and build you a well in your own house, you will be the owner of that well, and my zakat money will be used to build that well, that's fine because the well is not being given in ownership to the other person. Also remember that you don't have to give in cash. You can give in items. So for example, there's a student who is poor and they meet the they're eligible for zakat, I can actually buy them books and give with zakat money and say, here, I'm giving you these books as zakat, right? You can give it in items. I can buy somebody a car. I can buy someone, in a poor country, I can buy them a rickshaw, right? A tuk-tuk, and say, here, I'm buying you this because you're eligible for zakat. I'm buying you this as zakat money. Here, take it. It's now yours. And you can now make, you can now use it to make some money. So there has to be ownership. That's why you can't give zakat to a masjid where the masjid is going to be, using the money within the masjid itself. Yes, if a masjid is collecting zakat to give to poor people, where there will be an ownership transferred to a poor person, that's different. There, you're not giving to the masjid; you're just making the masjid your agent. So you can't give to like a masjid, a madrasa, orphanage, unless there is a poor recipient at the end of it that is going to take ownership of that zakatable assets. For example, in certain hospitals in poor countries, you can give zakat to the hospital in the sense that if they're going to use that medication and give that to a poor person to own, right? So in that case, if there is that ownership at the end of it, then you can give zakat to that person. You can't use zakat to pay for someone's burial, shrouding, and stuff like that, because that person's passed away, they're not becoming the owner of it. Ownership is extremely key. Certain people you can't give zakat to, also anyone that's directly above and below. So you can't give it to your mom, your dad, your granddad, your grandmother. You can't give it to your son, your daughter, your grandson, your granddaughter. You can't give it to your husband or your wife. Other than that, you can give it to other relatives. You can give it to your brother, your sister, your nephew, your niece, your uncle, your auntie, your grandparents, siblings, but not directly above, not directly below, not husband and not wife, right? So those are the relatives you can and can't give it to. You can't give it to someone who is known as a Sayyid, who comes from one of these family trees, the descendants of either Ali, Abbas, Ja'far, Aqil, radiallahu anhum ajma'in. Yep, you can't give it to any of them. You can't give it to someone who has non-zakatable assets, except excluding the essentials, which are above the nisab. We discussed that already. Some frequently asked questions quickly before we end in the last minute. So we've covered that mixture. Zakat should be distributed as quickly as possible. So you can delay slightly, but you shouldn't delay beyond a year. So within a year, try to make sure that that money is gone and is given to a poor person as quick as possible. Make sure you distribute that. Zakat needs to be paid on jewelry each year. We've covered that already. That one we don't need to do. I've kept some money aside for something. You're gonna have to pay zakat on it. If you're saving up money to buy a house, even though you're saving it to buy an essential, it doesn't matter. As long as we haven't bought it yet. So as long as you have that saving, you have to pay zakat on it. If I'm putting money on the side for Hajj, then I need to pay zakat on that money, even though it's going to be used for Hajj. Until I've not made the payment, I have to pay zakat on that money. Sometimes parents buy things for their children's wedding, for their children's, wedding clothes or wedding, jewelry and stuff like that. Then you still have to pay zakat on it. If it belongs to you, you're still gonna have to pay zakat on it, right, at that moment in time, because it's not something that you've separated. You're not giving it over to somebody else. A key thing to remember is, in terms of jewelry, only gold and silver you pay zakat on. You don't pay zakat on anything else, no diamonds, nothing else, unless they were purchased for the purpose of selling, because then in that case, they're going to be a zakatable asset. Finally, intention is very important. So you have to make the intention when paying that this I'm paying on behalf of zakat, or when you're separating it, you can separate it, right? You can say, I'm putting this money aside, it's for zakat. So later when somebody comes to ask for charity, I can give them from there. So you either have the intention when you're giving it or when you're separating it. You don't have to tell the person it's zakat. Sometimes you have poor relatives that you want to give them zakat, but they won't take it if you tell them it's zakat. You don't have to tell them it's zakat. You just intend that it's zakat and you give zakat accordingly. Okay, jazakumullahu khaira. If anybody has any questions, then I can take any questions that you may have before we wrap this up and we end, inshallah ta'ala. I know I had to rush, sorry, towards the end slightly, but I didn't want to go too much over time. These presentations do take a bit of time, but we just managed to reach about an hour or so. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. You can just type it in the chat section. Barakallah feek. again, this was like, the very general principles and guidelines. If you have a particular case that you're confused about, or you need some more clarification on, or you don't understand something and just, some follow-up questions or something, then you can either just get in contact with your local imam and just, you can just ask them or take a particular scenario to them. There's something you don't understand. Alternatively, you can also use some of these fatwa departments. White Thread Institute uses fatwacenter.org, so you can send questions there. I will receive the question. Yeah, regarding the recording, I'm not actually sure, because I'm not sure if Mona Huzaifa is here. Is Mona Huzaifa here? Or Mulana Hashim? I don't know if they want to. Masjid Abu Bakr is here. Okay, so I don't know. I'll discuss with Mona Huzaifa and then.
Assalamualaikum. We can upload this whole video onto our YouTube channel, inshallah.
Masjid Abu Bakr YouTube channel?
Yeah.
Okay, fine, inshallah. So Masjid Abu Bakr YouTube channel, you'll be able to find the presentation with the recording there, inshallah ta'ala. I'll maybe just send a link for where you can access the presentation as well, inshallah. Okay, so if there are no other questions, then Jazakumullah khair everyone for attending. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this a means of us becoming closer to him, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it a means of us, fulfilling our duties and responsibilities in this world, and fulfilling all of our debts, and making sure that when we stand before him on the day of judgment, we have all of our debts and everything fulfilled, so that inshallah he's pleased with us on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Jazakumullah khair. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.